This is a Unit 1 revision video. Key topic 2, the Prague Spring of 1968. Okay, so Prague is the capital of Czechoslovakia, and in some respects there are many similarities with what happened in Hungary. So Czechoslovakia is a satellite state, and communism appears to have very few benefits for the people living there. They're experiencing a declining standard of living. The secret police are fully in charge. The leader of the country, a man called Newbury, is very unpopular. You know, he's a hard-line communist devoted to the Soviet Union. There's no political freedom, and there's lots of economic problems. So this is the background, and they want better. Now, there's a change in leader at the beginning of January 1968 when a man called Alexander Dubček becomes the Communist Party leader in Czechoslovakia. And he has promised to introduce a series of reforms. He is a devoted communist, but he wants to win support for communism by removing what he sees as its worst features. Okay? He is the one who believes in socialism with a human face. He wants to introduce greater political freedoms, including freedom of speech, the abolition of press censorship, and by the March of 1968, the newspapers are printing uncensored discussions of political problems. Czech radio and television is also broadcasting, more of the real picture of what is going on. He wants a 10-year programme of political change which would bring in democratic elections. He wants a multi-party state system. He wants to reduce the powers of the secret police, to imprison without trial, and he wants to remove travel restrictions and develop trade contact with the West. Okay? Now, he begins to introduce these reforms. And the Soviet Union begins to get a little bit suspicious. Dubček is on very friendly terms with the Soviet leader, a man called Brezhnev. Now, in contrast to what happened in Hungary, Dubček has never said that he wanted to leave the Warsaw Pact. And these reforms are to make communism stronger. But the Soviets are getting very concerned that these new ideas might spread to other satellite states, and they come under pressure from the East German leader, Walter Ulbricht, and the Polish leader, Gomulka, to stop these reforms. They're very suspicious of what is going on. Czechoslovakia seems to be getting closer to Western Germany. They seem to be getting closer to Tito in Yugoslavia. So, what eventually ends up happening is a full-scale invasion of Czechoslovakia in order to retake control. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, and there's a series of events over the summer of 1968 to deal with those reforms that Dubček wanted to introduce. So, the reforms split the Czechoslovakian population. Younger Czechoslovakian people are, fully behind Dubček, and they like these reforms. People like Václav Havel as well are writing books and essays, and there's plays criticising Soviet-style communism. But a lot of the older Czechoslovakian communists are very shocked by what is going on. And Brezhnev has a real dilemma. Dubček and Brezhnev are friends. He hasn't made any attempt to leave the Warsaw Pact or damage the USSR, but there's reports that what he is doing is weakening the Soviets' control over Eastern Europe. So in the July of 1968, Brezhnev meets with leaders of the Warsaw Pact. They discuss their concerns. Dubček comes along, and he agrees not to allow a new Social Democratic Party. So one of his reforms was to allow other political parties. He agrees to end that, but he's going to go ahead with his reform programme, and tensions eased at that point. At the beginning of August, Warsaw Pact countries again meet with Dubček in Bratislava, and they sign the Bratislava Declaration declaring their faith in communism. And again, people, including Brezhnev, seem reassured with Dubček. When Tito goes to visit in August, and remember Tito is leader of Yugoslavia, Yugoslavia is communist but is independent from the USSR, Brezhnev begins to get concerned that Dubček is moving towards independence. And in the middle of August, there's a Soviet Politburo meeting, so a meeting of the main men in the USSR, and they decide that something needs to be done. Brezhnev tries to speak to Dubček on the phone, they end up having an argument, and Brezhnev makes it clear that he has no choice. Dubček's actions threaten to bring down the Warsaw Pact, and that the Soviet Union is going to be invaded. And that's exactly what happens on the 20th of August 1968. Hundreds and thousands of Soviet troops, backed by units from Warsaw Pact countries like Bulgaria, East Germany, Hungary and Poland, enter Czechoslovakia. And the Czechoslovakians throw petrol bombs at the Soviet tanks, buildings are set on fire, there's big protests in Prague, barricades on the street, the protesters try to reason with the tank drivers, but the Czechoslovakian army does not fight back. There is a non-violent response. That's what Dubček asks for. There is some violence, but in comparison to the Hungarian uprising, not so much. Dubček is then forced to sign something called the Moscow Protocol. And this Moscow Protocol reinforces communism and promises to reintroduce censorship, remove political opposition, basically reverse all of the reforms that Dubček had brought in. Brezhnev then states the Brezhnev Doctrine, which he uses to justify the invasion of Czechoslovakia. And he states that the USSR has the right to invade any country in Eastern Europe whose actions appear to threaten the security of the whole Eastern Bloc, sending out the message that if any other country in the Eastern Bloc tries to do this, this is what they will be faced with. Okay. So why hasn't America got involved? Again, it didn't get involved in Hungary, despite the Truman Doctrine and all these promises. Well, it's preoccupied in Vietnam and with the presidential election. Now, one of the big consequences of the Prague Spring is that it splits communist parties in Europe. Western European communist parties are very angry by what has happened, by the invasion. The French and Italian communist parties, which are quite big, declare themselves independent, and they set up Euro-communism in opposition to Soviet communism. Romania and Yugoslavia, both as communist nations, move closer to China. And East Germany and Poland support Brezhnev. They are worried that there might be an attempt to copy Dubček's reforms in their countries, and they do not want that at all. But in the end, Brezhnev has clearly stamped his authority on Czechoslovakia, and the reforms that Dubček introduced are quickly overturned. Gustav Husak is the man who is put in charge. He follows strict communist ideas, and the Czech Communist Party is purged of any Dubček supporters, so no progress is made. Dubček himself isn't executed, but he is sent as an ambassador to Turkey and then forced to resign. One famous event which you might want to draw on is that in January 1969, a young man called Jan Palach set fire to himself in Wenceslas Square in the middle of Prague as a protest against the Soviet invasion. Okay, there are some images of what happened when Prague was taken back from Dubček and his supporters.